Hi, everyone, and welcome to 40 Minutes of Faith. My name is Barbara Cox, and I host this weekly podcast to explore God's Word and our relationship with God. Today is part 2 of an introduction to Islam with my professor, Dr. Gülsüm Kucuksari. I'll be introducing her in just a minute and wanted to catch you up on the episode that was released last week so that in case you haven't listened to it, you have a sense on the first half of the conversation. Why on earth would a Christian podcast have 2 episodes about the Muslim faith? I have a few reasons for you, and I want to invite you to have a cup of tea with me if you drink tea or coffee or your beverage of choice. I don't think I've ever specifically invited you to sit down and have a cup of tea with me on this podcast, but it's a cultural way of spending time with each other, getting to know each other over conversation, which I have mentioned before is something that not all Americans are good at. I think there's even cultural differences within the United States, but at least in New England, where I'm from, we pretty much get down to business. And even if we do have a cup of coffee or tea, maybe it's just me and my family or kind of my European background, but this is an international cultural way of spending some time with each other. So I have some reasons for you if you want to take a sip, unless you're doing something else, and I'll tell you why. So why is it on my heart that we are having this conversation, that we did this recording, and that it's 2 episodes long? Many times in podcast episodes to date, we have talked about loving your neighbor. And we've talked about, well, who is our neighbor? And to my understanding, our neighbor is in the very broadest sense of the word. It's not just the people who live right there and who live right there or across the street. It's the folks in my community, in my county, in my state, in my country, and truly in the whole world. Now you're thinking, okay, they don't live anywhere near you, but there are neighbors in God's creation. And there's room for fear in our lives of the unfamiliar. So maybe you don't have a lot of fear of the unfamiliar, but when I saw my course listings last year, when I was signing up for classes at my seminary, which is Wartburg Theological Seminary, and I saw an elective called Introduction to Islam, I felt right away that this was something that I needed to learn more about, basically, that there's a lot of information out there that may or may not be accurate. And now some of it definitely is the truth. Sometimes we see bad news and we believe it to be fact-based. And then one thing that I did learn in this class that I already knew before, but it really brought it home to me, is that sometimes there's other information out there that we're not being told about. And, you can't know everything, but how can I educate myself so that there is room for facts and so that my fear is well placed and not generalized or too big, like for the whole population? I don't need to be afraid of all Muslims or all people who practice Islam. And that's actually a nuance that I learned about also. When you see the news, you assume the worst of someone. Well, maybe you don't, but a lot of people do. And you think, oh, this person is, say, maybe fanatical about their faith or something like that. And that may not be the case, actually. So there is research out there. I'm not going to spend tons of time on statistics right now, but just to let you know that not everyone who does something that may cause fear is doing so out of religious reasons. And another example of what I'm talking about, that I wanted my mind to be opened, and you kind of forget, or at least I sometimes forget, is that there are also plenty of occasions to be afraid of people who might look just like me. So say, for example, just to pick one from a long time ago, the Oklahoma City bombings were perpetrated by a white man. So there's a bunch of statistics out there about the proportion of incidents that happen from people of different ethnic or racial backgrounds, and then also religious backgrounds. And there are people of the Christian faith who also perpetrate crimes, who kill people, who murder people, and that's in the news. But then what stays in your mind more? So I wanted to be open-minded, first of all, and I want to invite all of you to be open-minded, and we're going to get to our content in just a minute. And then I also believe that getting to know our neighbors helps, because there is an interfaith component, I believe, of our relationship with people. And so to that effect, I just have two statements to read to you from my Lutheran faith body, which is the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I'm going to be putting a bunch of links on the podcast website for this episode right now. And then also I want to highlight for you the resources that are already on there from last week in case you didn't listen to it or haven't seen it. So I'm going to be putting up elca.org and then also the specific link to this document, which is a declaration of interreligious commitment. And this was published in 2019. So I just want to read a couple of sentences to you about why I believe that this is important and right to have this conversation with my professor. On page 3 of the statement, it says, "In a deeply divided world, and as a faithful response to Christ's message of reconciliation, we seek right, peaceful, and just relationships with all our neighbors, including those of other religions and worldviews." And then it goes on for a couple of more pages. It's all important stuff, but that's not why I'm here to read you the entire statement today. Just wanted to highlight on page 6, the statement says, "When we engage our religiously diverse neighbors, we can expect both a new understanding of the other and a deeper understanding and appreciation of our own Christian faith. Mutual understanding involves moving from factual knowledge of commonalities and differences to grasping coherence and even glimpsing beauty. In discovering how others love and cherish their religious traditions, we more deeply love and cherish our own. We empathize with the challenges and struggles others face in their religious commitments, as well as appreciate their joys. Mutual understanding opens the possibility of friendship and accepting responsibility for each other's well-being." So that's an example of what I'm talking about when I say that our neighbors are everyone, even though that's a really lot of people. So let me share with you some of the resources that are posted on the podcast website, which is 40minutesoffaith.com. You can check those out. Certainly listen to the other episode if you have a few minutes. You don't have to listen to it before listening to this one, but just to let you know, this is part 2 of the conversation that's coming up in just a minute. The professor talked about a movie that we were assigned to watch, a very short documentary for one of our class assignments. It's spelled REAL, Real Bad Arabs. And that's about how Hollywood depicts Arabs in general, which you probably will admit is typically pretty bad. And how is that realistic? Is it not realistic? Is it really kind of stereotypical? And frankly, is it racist? I brought up one of the required textbooks for the class, which is called The Fear of Islam by Todd Green, and I cannot recommend that book highly enough. If you have some time to take a look at some further information, if it makes a difference to you, Todd Green is a Christian pastor and has a doctorate degree, so very well educated, experienced, and in my opinion, explains this information in what I perceive to be a fairly neutral and unbiased method. Now, you may not agree with that, but it seems to me to be pretty fact-based and very informative, I felt. We also talked about single stories. There's a link to an article online, you can also Google it yourself, about how we sometimes in our mind really make too broad assumptions of things. So the example that my professor had brought up is a lot of people, maybe not you, but think of the gigantic continent of Africa as being poor. And that's just not true. Yes, absolutely, there is poverty on the continent of Africa, but not the whole continent of Africa is poor, or other assumptions that we make about people in a certain region. And that also was an example highlighted in the textbook that I just mentioned, The Fear of Islam. Actually, it's not really a textbook, but for my purposes, it was that we assume things about other places, but those things might be true in our own places. So it's easy sometimes to criticize another place. Maybe we say, we're going to just be continuing the conversation now about women's rights in just a minute coming up. One example might be, well, the women in this place are treated horribly. They're abused, they're oppressed, whatever. Okay, that might be true. And are there also women in this other place who are not being treated horribly and oppressed. And I'm not minimizing that the women are being abused. Give me 1 second for the second half of the sentence, which is, you know what, there's women right here where I live, where you live, who are being treated horribly, oppressed, and abused. And is it easier for us to think about, oh, those people over there, they treat each other really badly, when in fact, we treat each other really badly here too. So it's a universal issue. It's not just, oh, this one corner of the world, they treat people really badly, because that happens here as well. We also talked about a Muslim theologian named Said Nursi. The last name is spelled Nursi, who wrote a great deal about faith. And my professor spoke about Sufism, which is part of Islam. So she explained what is Sufism all about, what is mysticism, kind of a way of approaching faith that's about relationship with God. And as part of that conversation, we talked about the poet Rumi, who you may have heard of. And I read one verse of a poem, and then we talked a little bit about that poem, which was about Moses, actually, and Moses talking with the shepherd, and then God talking to Moses, that I thought was really meaningful even to me as a Christian. I felt like I could pull things out of that poem that were meaningful to me, especially when talking about relationship with God, between God and people. So wanted to share those resources with you as well. So I'm not going to tell you every single thing that we talked about in the first episode. Let you take a listen to that. And let me go ahead now and introduce my professor to you, and we'll go ahead and continue the conversation and have some more tea while you're at it. Let's have some more tea together. Today's guest is Dr. Kucuksari, who was one of my professors this past semester at Wartburg Theological Seminary. Gülsüm has served as faculty at a number of academic institutions and also as a chaplain in Arizona and Massachusetts. She holds a Master's of Arts in Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim Relations from Hartford Seminary, and her PhD is in Near and Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Arizona. Welcome, Gülsüm. I say this every time. It's difficult for me to address faculty by their first names, but it's the Wartburg way, and I don't intend any disrespect of your academic accomplishments. How are things so far for you this year?
Thank you, Barbara. It's a challenging year, like for everyone else and as me as well, but it's going okay. Yeah.
Good. Yes, challenging and then some. I'm very grateful that I took your class in Introduction to Islam because I didn't really know very much about it. And I learned that my impressions of the Muslim faith from the news and media was often based on misinformation. Yeah, thank you. And then in terms of women's issues, I just wanted to point out two things. Not only the book by Green, but also many other articles that we read talked about women's rights are not consistently either upheld or denied throughout the world. So there are many Middle Eastern countries where women have high amounts of education. Yeah. And say, for example, in the United States or other Western places, there are many women who are abused and oppressed. So it's not fair to say, oh, let us white people go rescue these Muslim women in a stereotypical way, like we've been talking about, that yes, people all around the world need help, men and women of all different skin colors, including in the United States. And that there are also places where women are not being abused and have education and have rights and have even government leadership positions. So I was glad to learn many different aspects of that concept.
Mm-hmm. We didn't talk about the golden civilization or the time of the golden ages for the Muslims, right? We didn't actually mention that, but I think it is important to mention here briefly because in Islamic tradition, there is a high value, traditionally, given to education. And as you talked about the Muslim women in the United States, for example, when you look at the ratios, the Muslim women having graduate education in the US is higher than regular American women. And even in countries like Iran, which actually has women rights abuses, we actually have more women having undergraduate education than men. Or I'm from Turkey. So Turkey, it is very similar. I mean, it is actually a mixture of Western and Eastern world, I think I would say. And of course, there are abuses, but I think I can really compare it to a Western context because you can easily have education. We have some problems in Turkey today, which is it's very problematic because it's actually Islamic government today.
Mm. I have a practical question for you. And then if you can kind of frame that together, if there's a way, how can ordinary people respect other ordinary people who might be different from each other, even perhaps in a visible way? So say, for example, I think I know the answer, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Is it respectful of me to say, oh, Gülsüm, I'm so sorry you have to wear a headscarf. You shouldn't have to wear that. You go ahead and take it off. Is that, how can we respect each other?
Yeah.
How can I respect you? And
yeah, good question. Definitely not, right?
I was pretty sure you were going to say that. And I apologize that the example is kind of stringent, but even you had mentioned France. If I'm hiring you, your brain is brilliant. It doesn't matter to me if you wear a headscarf, but can we talk about just showing that basic respect for your values, your beliefs, and in this case, of visible attire?
Yeah. Most importantly, we should just respect each other, whatever, whoever we are, however we dress or whatever we are. But I think one of the reasons of respect should also come from, again, our shared traditions, because Muslims did not invent the modesty codes for men or women, right? It is an Abrahamic tradition. I mean, I asked my students, can you imagine Amish women wearing bikinis? And they would all laugh at this. And I said, it is the same thing, right? So it's modesty codes. And even today in the Middle East, we have Christian women and Jewish women wearing very similarly with Muslim women, like wearing the headscarf, and some of them even wearing burqas, face coverings, which is more traditional than religious. So, I personally had an experience of something similar to what you just told. Like, I remember an older lady when I was a chaplain in a hospital. She was telling me, and she was actually an older lady, a sick lady that I visited in my turns, and she told me like how sad she is for me that my husband might be oppressive, but I understand her. Like, what can I say? Like, because this is what she knows, and I didn't want to hurt her or anything, but that was sad. I wish I could explain that to her in a second, but it is not possible. And this is, I think, what is so frustrating for us as Muslims. Like, it is so hard to explain all of this in briefly because politics get in play, history gets in play, and if you are not well versed, if you didn't get that education, it is so hard to explain all of those things to people, and you just stay silent and you just say nothing. A very similar experience, especially the stereotype for women wearing the headscarf. I experienced was you're uneducated. And the first time I remember when I applied for a chaplaincy in a hospital, they asked to come in, and then I think they were going to, it was either for shots or something. I don't remember exactly, I can't recall. But she asked me if I was what is that called? Custodian.
Gosh.
And
No, you're not.
I no longer get angry because I know some people don't do it on purpose. But it is also a frustration because you wish you could explain it, but you can't explain it very easily. You can just say, no, I'm not, and this is all, but you can't really change that person's perception because probably she would do the same thing to another person that is in the same shape.
Yeah, but if I came in wearing a cross, she probably wouldn't ask me if I was the custodian, which is totally unfair because I could be. What the probability? Oh gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
But this is so maybe another example of Muslim psyche. Like, again, maybe something Americans, that would be helpful for them to be aware of, that we come from that racist backgrounds. Racist meaning we have encountered that so much in our lives. Even in a country like Turkey that I'm coming from, although it's a Muslim country, although it is a Middle Eastern country, because of the Western hegemony, it was never colonized, but the mentalities are so colonized. Like, there was this, and there still is, this understanding of if you are more European-like, in your beliefs. And it is not like Christian, it's more like atheistic, version of being Westerner. If you wear like them, if you think like them, if you dance like them, then you are more valued. And I come from that place where you are daily encountering that. And the reason I came to US was because of the ban against headscarf in my own country. I couldn't go to college with my headscarf. I had to take it off for 4 years, and then which led me to go to another place where I could have education with my headscarf. So first thing, maybe my American friends should understand is that it's a choice. Like I made that choice, and it is something that's spiritual to me and I think women would understand me, because I think as we get modest, don't get distracted as much. I mean, there's something in us. I don't know, Barb, if you share with me, but women have a tendency. We like to be beautiful. I think it's a very women thing. And sometimes when we go from the limits and wear shorts or this and that, it can actually distract us from God. Maybe it's my own personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I shouldn't have. But this has been my experience. And I know a lot of Muslim women share that. And I heard from some Christian students of mine saying Christian women also are modest. Yeah, she told me. So I think there's this sense of, so it's a choice that you actually find spiritual, you find is a ritualistic. And then the other thing that my friends should also be aware of is we come from that racist background where we have experienced something reminiscent of African American experience. No, I can't really compare it to, because that would be belittling their experience, but that is reminiscent of it because of there is a cultural racism, maybe I should say, in Turkey that I went through because of like you are automatically thought of you're ignorant. Like I remember a friend of mine told me when her mother, who was actually a teacher, when she went to a government place and they asked her to, sign, they automatically told her, you can just put your finger on. Probably you don't know how to sign. And because people would earlier, just, stamp on their finger. So, and they automatically think it's very similar to what I experienced here, like if you're a custodian. So so many examples of that. And so knowing that, I think would help our American friends to put, or let's say, to see more parts of the puzzle.
Yeah.
To look at.
Don't assume that anyone is less educated or more educated or that they're oppressed. Now, they might be, but it's not automatic proof. And I just want to throw myself under the bus. I like to do this because I had to look up the word hegemony at the beginning of class because I had heard about it, but I wasn't really exactly sure what it meant. So I only will say that about myself. Probably everybody listening knows what it means, but just in case anybody is not quite sure, and you can double check me on this. This is like a pop quiz for me. I think it means, like the example was given of Europeans during colonial times coming in and basically saying, we're better. Our way is the right way, the way we do things, and the way the local people have the culture and the life is inferior. So we're speaking against that, basically.
Yeah. And it is not always very apparent. Hegemony is not always very
okay.
It is not always very obvious. Like the media talks of and I don't know, okay, when I say Western values, I don't actually mean Christian values. Because it is more about the notions of against belief, because there was also Europe actually went through the crisis against religion, and there's a lot of atheist philosophers that has been very influential in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. So what we see in the movies, for example, they don't represent Christian values to us, right? So this is what I refer to. So the Western values have this hegemony all over the world today. And it is not like they are saying we're better than you. But of course, women, one of my students actually said that, she said, But women who are wearing shorter and shorter, like less and less, they are valued more in our societies today. Like, look at the lives of these movie stars. I mean, look at that. It is just a given. Like, you should be that way. And so the hegemony is not always like we're better than you, but it gives this idea that educated women or a decent woman at least should not have a headscarf, because this is what our media says. And maybe it is also maybe another way of saying it. We don't have different representations of different women. We only get to see one type of women all the time. Again, it's a single story. Like, do we only have, even in Turkey, for all those years that I had problems in Turkey, we never had like a TV speaker in a headscarf, a woman. Like, there is this image, and it is a default, except it is default. Like, you have to be in this shape if you want to be accepted in this society. Yeah. So I think media actually enforces us towards that. Like, there is this accepted and unaccepted images, and we unconsciously accept it. Even yes. Me, as a person wearing the hijab for so long, when the first time I saw a TV speaker, I remember that, in a hijab, okay, the first time in Turkey. What my first reaction was? I laughed at it. I was like, so unconsciously, we are bought into it. So, and it's very embarrassing. It's very embarrassing. Why do I do that? I'm one of them, because I'm not familiar with that image. Like, it is not acceptable to your mind. Even if you are doing it, it's so ridiculous, but it is true. So again, hegemony is, unfortunately, it is less obvious than it is obvious. It is, yeah.
And I'm grateful that you point that out, because it's easy for me to say, oh, it's a problem that was in the past, and we're beyond that now, and we're not I say, well, we're not beyond racism. So then, but if there's kind of subtle expectations, or I agree with you, even styles and attire and what kind of car you drive, your body size, there's many different ways.
Yes, accepted and non-accepted, right? Yeah, it's very true. Yeah.
Exactly. So we do have some resources for folks that I want to make sure to mention. And I also like to ask, are there any other elephants in the room that we haven't talked about yet today that you want to bring up? Is there anybody's voice that's missing? And I'll give you a second just to think if there's any of those that you want to bring up. I want to mention a website called shouldertoshouldercampaign.org, which is groups of people who are coming to support their neighbors. And so it's not, I don't believe it's explicitly Christian people supporting Muslim people. I think it's an interfaith organization. I'm not very familiar with it, but I was looking up different types of resources to recommend, and we have all kinds of academic books and the videos that you had mentioned. But this one looks like it really is valuing human connection and human support. And the author of the book that I had mentioned contributed to a study that is on the Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota website. Their website is lssmn.org. And I'll put that on there also, because not only are many refugees Muslim or of any other or no other faith in particular, but it talks about my neighbor is Muslim and how can just regular people learn some information to have these supportive relationships and to not judge each other on misunderstandings and things like that. So I would love to hear any other resources that you have in mind, or if there's any other elephants in the room that we haven't talked about yet, or anyone whose voice might be missing from this conversation.
Barbara, it just actually reminded me of an Abrahamic Traditions book club coming off. So I can actually just announce the upcoming book club on the Abrahamic traditions. So the book is written by a friend of mine who is a Jewish scholar, professor of history and emeritus. And so his name is Charles Cohen, and he's going to be leading the book club. So he wrote the book. So if you're interested if folks are interested, they are welcome to join us. And the elephant in the room, again, I think I already mentioned it, but to emphasize, I think the elephant we may not like to see is, I think, for our American friends, is, I think, how we handled or mishandled the Muslim faith or Muslims. And I think we have to come to grips with the fact that we have put Muslims into a box, and it is not a very nice box. So I'm saying, let's open ourselves to hear what they had to say. Let's open ourselves. Sometimes it may hurt us what they have to say, but it is not going to hurt us all the time. So let's open ourselves to also hear about these great Muslim thinkers, philosophers, mathematicians, for example, like that lived in the Middle Ages when the West was going through its dark times, the Muslim world was going through its golden ages. Let's open ourselves to hear from these thinkers, and I'm sure it's going to enrich us. So, of course, Muslims have to focus on their own mistakes, because they have to get rid of this victim mentality. It's not helping to Muslims. It's not helpful. It's not taking them anywhere. But for our American folks, I think our focus should be on our mistakes and let's try to understand who these people are and what their faith tradition is also about, and what are the similarities. And I think our present condition in America provides us many examples also to compare, like the issues of race and white supremacy. So I think we are in a very good context, especially at this time in history, right, with the death of George Floyd. Yeah.
And just like you said, to not paint all people with the same brush, that we have many nuanced differences in many different cultures. So I appreciate you saying, let's listen to our siblings of all different faiths and different types of backgrounds, because I suspect that there may be some Christians even who say, my Christianity is not the same as this other one over here. And some of it might be the rituals that you had mentioned, or the mysticism, the connection with God. But some of it is even, you had mentioned divorce previously. That's a hot button issue for some people, how different people may be accepted or judged or forgiven. There's so many different, and that's just one example. So I need to stop there. But how about we listen to each other more and try to have an understanding and acknowledge not everybody's the same, which is really obvious, but we forget it.
Barbara, I think one of the blessings that I see in my life is to come to a different culture, to a Christian culture, I should say, because I was born and raised in a Muslim society, 99% Muslim. And although I only remember one Christian friend in college whom I was very reserved from. I didn't have the courage to be friends with her. And now looking back, I wish I actually had the courage. But coming to this society, I think it's a blessing of God. I mean, I really see this. Honestly, I see this as a blessing of God, because, I mean, you only see just one part of the entire creation of, human beings of God when you are in your little local area. But when you come to a totally different culture, I have experienced the beautiful spirituality of my Christian friends, and I shared and I saw the beauty of. I hope I came out of the box of like, oh, God only saves certain people. I am so grateful for that experience to God, because I see that compassion of God everywhere, not only in my land, which I thought was better. So again, like, we need to hear each other. I think this is fine, because as we hear from each other, we see the compassion of God that we want to be so close to, right? And this is a blessing of God that we should cherish, I think, to talk to different people.
And not to sort of just play the other side or something like that, but it's very interesting to me that many people might think of the United States as a, quote, Christian country, and maybe some of that goes back to even the foundations of the country, but it was also partly fleeing from religious persecution and supposedly allowing people to live the way they wanted to. And on behalf of our siblings who might be of the Jewish faith or Buddhist or no faith at all, I don't know if that's true, but maybe that's how the impression is. For me, it's okay, but that's not necessarily, perception. That's really what we're talking about, is perception, just how things come across.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I agree with you, Barb. Definitely.
Yeah. Do you have any other resources in mind or anything else that you'd like to share with us today?
I think that will be a good introduction. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, Gülsüm, and I appreciate you sharing some of your experiences as well that brings sort of the academic concepts into real life. Although I do feel terrible and apologize that some people have made incorrect assumptions about you or other people that as well. So thank you for your time.
Yes. Thank you, Barb. Thank you again for having me.
Of course.
Heavenly Father, as we come before you today, we ask that you fully open our hearts and minds. Help us from developing or deepening hearts of judgment. May we be slow to make assumptions, be watchful of our sharp tongues, and be quick to recognize our wrong prejudice towards those who come from other cultures. May we only create ripples of love and not hate. May we only create peace and not sorrow. May we only be soft and accepting and not hateful and closed-minded. Help us to be channels of blessings and compassion from you as you transform us from the inside out. We desire to be accepting towards others, especially towards the ones we tend to shun. Forgive us for any harm or hurt we have placed into others' lives due to our own misunderstandings or lack of understanding. We are truly sorry for what we have done to others. In your name, we thank you for changing our spiritual eyes, hearts, minds, and souls. We love you. Amen.